The night felt longer than it was supposed to be. The streetlights blurred as she leaned, her head against the cold window of the taxi. Her hands trembled in her lap, and her breath came out in short, uneven waves. She told herself it was just stress, just tiredness, just another night of pretending everything was fine. But deep inside, she knew something wasn't right. The pain had been there for weeks. Sometimes it was a dull ache. Other times it felt like a heavy stone pressing on her chest. She ignored it as much as she could because she didn't have time to be sick. Life didn't pause. Bills didn't wait. Work didn't understand not feeling well. So she kept going until her body finally said no. That night, she collapsed outside a small grocery store. A stranger helped her sit down. Someone else called a taxi. She didn't remember much after that, only lights and voices that sounded far away. When she opened her eyes again, she was in the back seat, staring at the ceiling, trying to stay awake. She hated hospitals, not because of the smell or the needles or the long waits. She hated them because of how small they made her feel, like she was just a number. Like her pain didn't matter if she couldn't pay. She had heard too many stories. Doctors who spoke without looking at you. Nurses who rushed past like you weren't there. Bills that ruin lives. She pressed her fingers together and whispered, "Just check me and let me go." The taxi stopped in front of the hospital. The building looked too big and too bright for someone who felt so small. Inside, everything smelled like disinfectant and cold air. A nurse at the front desk asked her name and a few quick questions. The nurse was kind, but busy. Everyone looked busy. Everyone looked tired. She sat in a wheelchair because her legs felt weak. The wheels made soft sounds on the floor as she was pushed through long white hallways. Her heart beat fast, not just from pain, but from fear. She kept telling herself, the doctor won't care. They never do. After what felt like hours, she was taken to a small examination room. The walls were plain. The bed was covered with clean white sheets. Machines beeped softly somewhere nearby. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the fabric of her worn-out sweater. She practiced the words in her head. I can't afford expensive tests. I don't have insurance. I just need something. For the pain, she was ready to defend herself before anyone had even judged her. The door opened. Quietly, a man in a white coat stepped inside. He looked tired, but his eyes were calm. He didn't rush. He didn't speak fast. He simply sat down on the small stool in front of her and looked up. "What happened tonight?" he asked. His voice wasn't cold. That surprised her. She hesitated for a moment, then told him everything. About the pain, the weakness, the work she couldn't miss, the way she had ignored the signs. Words fell out faster than she expected. It felt strange to talk so much in a place she hated. He listened without interrupting. He nodded sometimes. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't look at the clock. For the first time in a long while, she felt like someone was actually hearing her. "I'll take a look, all right?" he said gently. She nodded, trying not to show how scared she was. He checked her pulse. He checked her breathing. He asked small questions that showed he was paying attention to how she felt, not just what the machines might say. Still, she didn't trust it. Kind words in a hospital felt like a trick to her. In her mind, she kept repeating, "He'll change. He'll act different once he sees the test results." They always do. After the basic checks, he stepped out to arrange some tests. The room felt quiet again. Too quiet. The beeping of machines felt louder in the silence. She stared at the wall and thought about home. Her tiny apartment, the unpaid bills, the job that barely covered rent, the way she always smiled at others so they wouldn't know how tired she was inside. Tears slipped down her cheek without her noticing at first. A nurse came in later and took her for blood tests. The nurse spoke softly. The lighting in the hallway felt warmer now, or maybe she was just getting weaker. Afterward, the nurse brought her back and tucked a thin blanket around her shoulders. No one had done that for her in years. She tried to brush the feeling away. They're just doing their job, she told herself. But it didn't feel like just a job. When the doctor returned, he didn't stand at the door. He walked back to the stool and sat with her again. "You did the right thing coming in," he said like he meant it. She looked at him for a long moment. She wanted to be strong. She wanted to say she didn't care. But her voice cracked when she spoke. "I didn't want to come. I thought no one would care." He didn't laugh. He didn't look offended. He just said, "I care." Those two words hit her harder than the pain in her chest. No one had said that to her in a very long time still. A part of her stayed guarded. Pain had taught her not to trust kindness too quickly. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked down at her hands. "Please don't make this complicated," she whispered. "I can't deal with bad news." He nodded slowly. "We'll take this one step at a time." She didn't know why, but his voice made the room feel a little less cold. Hours passed slowly. She drifted in and out of light sleep. Every sound felt far away. Every movement felt heavy. Sometimes she thought she heard voices in the hallway. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps stopping by her door at some point. She woke up and noticed a small cup of water placed beside her bed. No one said anything. It was just there. Quietly waiting, she took a slow sip. The water tasted warmer than usual, or maybe it was just the warmth of being cared for. For the first time, she felt something different than fear. Confusion, because this wasn't how she thought it would be. She thought she would be ignored, rushed, treated like a problem instead. She felt seen. She wasn't ready to believe it. Not fully. But something inside her shifted slightly. A tiny crack in the wall she had built around her heart. Later that night, as she stared at the ceiling, she whispered to herself, "Maybe I was wrong," but she quickly pushed the thought away. Doctors weren't kind. Hospitals weren't safe. That's what she had believed for years. Yet, lying there under that thin blanket, with a cup of water by her side and gentle voices outside the door, her fear felt a little less sharp. She didn't trust it. Not yet, but for the first time in a long time. She wasn't completely alone. She woke to the soft hum of the machines beside her bed. The room was quiet except for the distant voices of nurses in the hallway. She blinked slowly and tried to remember where she was. The memory of the night before came rushing back: the taxi, the collapse, the fear, the doctor. Her chest ached, but it was different now. It wasn't only pain. It was mixed with something she hadn't expected, a little bit of hope. A nurse came in with a clipboard and smiled gently. "Morning," she said. "How are you feeling?" She hesitated. How should she answer? Her voice felt small and uncertain. I'm okay, I guess," she murmured. The nurse didn't push. She just nodded and left after making sure her blanket was tucked nicely around her shoulders. It was such a small gesture, yet it meant more than words could explain. She felt her eyes well up. She had forgotten what it felt like to be treated gently without strings attached, to be treated like a human instead of a number. Hours passed slowly. The doctor returned, carrying a folder of papers. He didn't sit far away. He came close, placing the folder on a chair beside her bed. His presence wasn't intimidating. It was calm, steady. She noticed that he never raised his voice. He didn't speak quickly, as if he was trying to rush her through everything. "Your tests are done," he said quietly. "Can I go through them with you?" She hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no. She feared bad news. She feared being judged, but something in the way he spoke made her nod. He opened the folder and explained each test slowly, carefully, as if he was teaching her about her own body. He didn't use big medical words that made her feel small. Instead, he used simple language, breaking things down. She found herself listening intently. "The pain you've been feeling has a cause," he said. "It's not just stress or tiredness. It's something your body has been trying to tell you for months." She swallowed hard. She had tried to ignore it, convinced herself it was nothing serious. But hearing it confirmed brought both fear and relief. Fear, because it was real. Relief, because now she wasn't alone in facing it. He didn't just talk about her illness. He asked about her life, about work, about how she had been coping. She was surprised. No one had asked how she was coping in years. The questions weren't intrusive, just careful, thoughtful, showing that he cared about her as a person, not just a patient. "You've been through a lot," he said finally. "It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be tired. We'll get through this together." She blinked back tears. No one had ever said anything like that to her. People always rushed past her pain or told her to deal with it herself. She wanted to believe him, but a part of her stayed guarded. Hope was dangerous. It could be taken away as quickly as it came. Over the next few hours, he arranged additional tests. Making sure she understood what each one was for and why it was necessary, he explained the steps in a way that made them seem manageable, not overwhelming. Whenever she flinched at the thought of pain, he paused, acknowledged her fear, and offered reassurance. At one point, she asked a question about her finances. She had been terrified of asking, knowing the cost of medical care could ruin her. But the doctor listened without a hint of judgment. He didn't make her feel small or ashamed. Instead, he said, "We'll find a way to make this manageable. Right now, the focus is on your health. Everything else we can figure out together." She wanted to believe him, and a little part of her did. But she still expected it to be temporary. She expected the kindness to disappear once the paperwork was done or the treatment started. She braced herself for disappointment, as that had always been her reality. As the day moved forward, the doctor checked on her several times. Each time, he asked not just about the tests or the pain, but about how she was feeling emotionally. She realized she hadn't had anyone ask her that in a long time. It wasn't easy to open up, but slowly, she found herself talking about her fears. Her sleepless nights, the loneliness she felt even in a crowded city. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply acknowledged her feelings and made space for them. By evening, she started to feel tired in a different way. Not just physically, but emotionally. She felt a strange combination of relief and exhaustion. Relief that someone was genuinely caring for her. Exhaustion from allowing herself to feel it. A nurse brought her some dinner. She didn't have much appetite, but she ate a little, encouraged by the gentle presence of the staff. When the doctor returned later that night, he checked on her again. He didn't rush through it. He sat beside her, looked her in the eyes, and spoke quietly. "Today was a big step," he said. "Just coming in, sharing everything, letting us help, you did something very brave." She looked at him, startled. Brave? She had never thought of herself that way. To her, it had been survival, daily survival. But hearing the word brave felt strange and powerful. It made something inside her stir. He continued, "It's okay to feel afraid. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. What matters is that you didn't let it stop you from coming here. That matters more than you know." She nodded, her throat tight. She wanted to speak, but words failed her. For once, silence didn't feel awkward. It felt shared, comforting even. As the night went on, she drifted in and out of sleep. She kept hearing his voice in her head, the calmness, the reassurance. She realized she had spent so many years expecting judgment and harshness, expecting coldness. And yet here was someone who didn't fit that expectation. Someone who treated her with patience, care, and respect. She couldn't stop thinking about how different it felt. It was disarming. She didn't know if she could fully trust it yet. But she felt something she hadn't felt in years. The possibility that not everyone in the world was unkind. Late at night, she sat up in bed and looked around the room. The hospital felt less like a prison now and more like a temporary safe place. The machines still beeped softly. The lights still glowed faintly. But it didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt like she was in a space where she could finally start to heal. Not just physically, but in a way that mattered to her entirely. She thought about the doctor again. How different he was from what she had imagined. She had expected someone impatient, someone judgmental, someone who would make her feel ashamed for needing help. Instead, he was kind, patient, and attentive. She realized she had been carrying a heavy weight of fear and mistrust for years. For the first time, she felt a crack in that wall. Tears slipped down her cheeks quietly. She wiped them away quickly, not wanting anyone to see. But inside, she felt lighter. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to being cared for without conditions. It made her nervous, but in a strange way. It also made her hopeful. As she lay down again, she whispered to herself, maybe I was wrong about him. It wasn't complete trust, not yet. It wasn't a full belief that kindness could be real, but it was a start. And after so many nights filled with fear, loneliness, and pain, even a small start felt like something extraordinary for the first time in a long while. She let herself imagine a future where help didn't mean judgment, where people didn't expect her to hide her suffering, where kindness could exist even in the cold halls of a hospital. She closed her eyes, holding on to that fragile thought. Tomorrow, she would face more tests, more uncertainty, more challenges. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of peace, a moment to feel that someone, somewhere, truly cared about her, and that was enough for tonight. The next morning, she woke to the soft sunlight spilling through the hospital window. It was brighter than she expected, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then the memory came back, the taxi, the pain, the fear, and she sat up slowly, feeling the ache in her chest. She had learned to expect pain, both inside and out, but today something felt different. The ache in her heart seemed a little lighter, though the one in her body remained. The doctor came in shortly after breakfast. He didn't rush. He didn't hover over her. He simply entered the room and gave her a small, reassuring nod. She noticed that he carried himself differently than she imagined most doctors did. He didn't move with the urgency of someone running from task to task. He moved with purpose, but calm, like he was fully present in the room with her, not just moving through the motions. "How did you sleep?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "Not great," she admitted. "But better than I thought I would." He nodded. "That's normal. Hospitals aren't the easiest place to sleep, but your body needs rest. And your mind needs it too." She stared at him for a moment. Nobody had ever cared so much about her mind as well as her body. Most people only focused on symptoms, test results, bills, or schedules. Nobody asked if she needed to feel safe, or if she was scared, or if she was exhausted in ways that didn't show. "Can I tell you something?" he asked after a pause, his voice quieter now. She looked at him, curious and cautious at the same time. "Yes," she said. "I've been where you are in a way," he said. "Not exactly the same, but I know what it's like to feel helpless, to feel small, to feel like the world has no time for your pain. That's why I do this the way I do. I try to make sure no one feels like that when they come here." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say. She had never expected a doctor to share anything personal. She had never expected someone in his position to admit that he understood her fear. It was strange and a little unsettling, because she had always assumed that people in authority were untouchable, unfeeling, almost mechanical. He continued softly. "I lost someone once because we couldn't act in time. It was someone I loved, someone close. And it changed the way I see things. I can't change the past, but I can make sure I do everything I can for the people in front of me now." She didn't speak. She just listened, her eyes fixed on his face. She realized she hadn't expected him to have a past, to have pain, to have a heart that bled like hers did. She had imagined him as a stranger, someone cold and untouchable. And now, seeing the weight he carried, she felt something stir inside her. A small part of her wanted to pull back. Another part wanted to reach out, to trust, to hope. She didn't know which side would win. She had been hurt too many times before. But listening to him, she began to understand that perhaps not all people were like the ones she had feared. Perhaps kindness didn't have to come with judgment. The day passed slowly with tests and checkups. Each time he came into the room, he didn't just talk about medicine. He asked how she was coping, if she needed water, if she felt safe, if she were hungry. He made sure she was comfortable. She was astonished. No one had ever made her feel so cared for without expecting something in return. During a brief pause in the afternoon, the nurse came in and whispered something to the doctor. He glanced at her and nodded. Then he leaned closer to her and said, "I want to show you something. It might help you understand what's happening." She followed him to a small examination area. He showed her the results of her previous tests and explained each finding carefully. But then he said something she didn't expect. "I want you to understand this, not just as medical information, but as part of your life story. You've been ignoring these signs for months. Not because you didn't care, but because you had to survive. You were carrying so much alone." How did he know? She hadn't said a word about struggling to manage her life while being sick. He must have seen it in the way she spoke, in her body language, in the exhaustion in her eyes. It was strange and unnerving to realize. Someone could see through her defenses so clearly. "Most people would just treat the symptoms," he said. "But you're more than that. I see that. And I want you to see it too." Something inside her loosened. She hadn't realized she needed someone to see her like this. To see her not just as a patient, but as a person. It made her feel nervous and safe at the same time. Nervous, because vulnerability was dangerous. Safe, because for the first time in years, she didn't feel judged. Later, when she returned to her room, she found a small notebook on her bedside table. There was no note, no signature. She opened it and found pages filled with simple advice, tips for coping, small words of encouragement. She recognized the handwriting. It was the doctor's. He didn't have to do this. No one had ever done anything like this for her. Tears pricked her eyes. She closed the notebook and held it to her chest. She didn't know why he cared so much. She didn't know why he went beyond the rules, beyond the job description. All she knew was that she felt seen. And it scared her because it was unfamiliar. That evening, she fell into a light sleep. In her dreams, she didn't see the collapse, the hospital, or the pain. She saw herself walking through streets without fear, speaking her mind without hesitation, laughing without worry. And in the corner of her mind, she could feel a steady presence, someone who had chosen to care when it would have been easier not to. When she woke, she realized she had been holding her breath for years, bracing herself for disappointment, for judgment, for coldness. And now, for the first time, she didn't feel the same weight. The presence of someone who genuinely cared had shifted something inside her. The doctor returned for the evening check. He sat down in the chair by her bed. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," she said slowly. "I don't know why, but better," he smiled. Sometimes knowing someone is with you makes all the difference. She wanted to argue that it was the medicine that made her feel better. But she realized it wasn't just that. It was the human connection. The care that didn't demand anything in return. The simple act of being acknowledged and understood. Her thoughts drifted to her past. She remembered all the times she had been ignored, dismissed, or judged. And she realized how heavy that history had been. How it had shaped the way she approached the world. She had built walls to protect herself from pain. Walls that kept her from trusting. But slowly, carefully, those walls were beginning to crack. And the strange thing was, it wasn't scary anymore. It was freeing. She felt the possibility of trust, the possibility of hope, the possibility that someone could truly care without asking for payment or obedience in return. As night fell, she stared out the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she didn't have to face everything alone. She didn't know what the future held, or how long this feeling would last. But she knew one thing. She had been wrong about him. She had assumed that the doctor would be like so many others, cold, distant, indifferent. And yet here he was, proving her wrong every step of the way, and for the first time in a long while. She felt something she hadn't felt in years, a fragile, trembling hope. The morning sunlight filtered gently through the blinds, touching her face with warmth. She stirred in bed, feeling the softness of the sheets beneath her. For the first time in days, she felt a little more rested. The steady care from the doctor and the nurses had given her a strange sense of comfort, though a small part of her still felt nervous. She knew the day ahead might bring answers she wasn't ready for. The doctor entered quietly, his presence calm as always. He didn't rush, didn't overwhelm. He simply pulled up a chair beside her bed and smiled softly. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Better," she admitted. Her voice was small, but there was honesty in it. She didn't fully understand why, but just having someone care made the world feel slightly less heavy. "Good," he said. "We'll go through your results today. You might feel nervous, but I'll explain everything carefully. No surprises." Her stomach tightened at the thought. She had been avoiding this moment for weeks, afraid that the truth would be worse than anything she could handle. She had imagined harsh words, judgment, or an impossible bill she couldn't pay. She pressed her hands together in her lap and nodded slowly. He began showing her the results, explaining each detail patiently. The medical terms were simplified, the charts broken down clearly, and each number connected to what she might feel in her body. She listened carefully, trying to absorb everything. "The condition you have is serious," he said gently, "but it is treatable. If we act carefully and follow the plan, you can get better." Relief and fear collided inside her. She had expected the worst, a hopeless situation with no solution. But here it was, a path forward, though not an easy one. She realized she had been holding her breath for years, bracing for the impossible, and now the impossible felt slightly possible. Then he paused. His expression softened. "I know the cost may seem overwhelming," he said quietly. "I understand. You don't have to face this alone." Her throat tightened. How did he know? She hadn't mentioned her financial worries out loud, though they had weighed on her mind constantly. She had spent countless nights wondering how she could survive being sick without losing everything she had worked for. She had assumed that hospitals only cared about bills. Kindness came with a price. "I can help arrange support," he continued. "We have programs that can help cover treatment costs. You won't have to walk away untreated." She stared at him, speechless. Her heart pounded. She wanted to believe him, but she had been disappointed too many times before. How could she trust that this was real? He seemed to sense her doubt. "I know it's hard to believe," he said softly. "I know you've been let down before. But this is different. We'll handle everything step by step. You don't have to carry it all alone." The nurse brought her some tea, and she took a slow sip, letting the warmth calm her. She realized that it wasn't just the treatment or the results that mattered, it was the feeling of being seen, understood, and cared for. She had spent so long hiding her struggles that she had forgotten what it felt like to be treated with compassion without judgment. The doctor spent the next few hours explaining the treatment plan. He spoke calmly, never rushing, never overwhelming. He answered every question she had, even the ones she didn't know how to ask. Whenever she flinched at the thought of tests or procedures, he acknowledged her fear and offered reassurance. At one point, she hesitated and said, "I don't know if I can handle this. It feels too much." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady on hers. "It is a lot," he admitted. "But you don't have to do it all at once. We'll take it step by step, one day at a time. And I'll be here to guide you through every step." Her chest ached, but it was different from before. It wasn't just pain. It was a mix of fear, gratitude, and cautious hope. She realized she hadn't allowed herself to feel hope in years. She had thought it was dangerous, that it would only lead to disappointment. But now she began to see that hope could coexist with caution. That trust could be built slowly, and that care didn't have to have strings attached. Throughout the day, the nurse and the doctor checked on her regularly. The small gestures, stucking the blanket around her shoulders, offering a glass of water, explaining a procedure again, made a difference far greater than she had expected. She began to feel a sense of security that she hadn't felt in a long time. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, the doctor returned for a final check-in. He didn't carry charts or papers this time. He simply sat beside her bed and spoke quietly. "I know this isn't easy," he said, "but you've been strong in ways you don't even realize. Facing this head-on, letting us help, it's a kind of courage that matters more than you know." She looked at him, her eyes welling up. "I don't know if I deserve this," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "You deserve care, kindness, and understanding. You deserve to be treated as a person, not just a patient. That's all you need to know." She wanted to argue, to say that she wasn't worth it, that she had made too many mistakes, that life hadn't treated her fairly. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she let herself feel the warmth of his presence, the steadiness of his care. For the first time, she realized that she didn't have to face her struggles alone. Later that evening, she reflected on everything that had happened. The fear she had carried, the expectation of judgment, the sense of isolation, all of it had been heavy, almost unbearable. Yet here she was, still scared, but lighter somehow. She had learned that someone could care without conditions, that trust could be built slowly, and that hope, fragile as it was, could exist even in the midst of fear. She thought about the future. The treatment wouldn't be easy. There would be hard days, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But she felt ready to face them, knowing that she had support, knowing that she had someone who truly cared about her well-being. As she lay in bed that night, she held the small notebook the doctor had given her. She read the words again, letting each sentence sink in. The encouragement, the advice, the gentle reminders, they were more than instructions. They were a message that she was not alone, that her pain mattered, and that she could face the future with courage. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were different. They weren't just for fear or pain, they were for relief, for gratitude, for the realization that she had been completely wrong about the doctor. She had expected heartlessness, judgment, and distance. Instead, she found kindness, patience, and genuine care. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: trust. And with that trust, a fragile but growing hope began to take root inside her. The morning sunlight touched her face again, soft and gentle, almost as if it had waited for her to wake up. She stretched slowly, feeling a stiffness in her limbs, but also a sense of strength she hadn't felt in weeks. The days in the hospital had been long and tiring, but they had been filled with something she had forgotten existed: care. Real, steady, patient care. The doctor came in quietly, as he always did, his presence calm and steady. He smiled when he saw her sitting up in bed. "Good morning," he said softly. "How are you feeling today?" She took a deep breath and smiled weakly. "Better," she said. It wasn't just her body speaking. It was her heart. She felt lighter somehow. She had survived the fear, the pain, the uncertainty. And through it all, someone had been there, steady and kind. "You've come a long way," he said, taking a seat beside her bed. "The progress isn't just physical. You've been strong in ways that matter more than you realize." She blinked, trying to hold back tears. I never expected anyone to care like this," she whispered. Her voice shook, not from weakness, but from the release of emotions she had held inside for too long. "I know," he said quietly. "I know it's hard to believe. That's why I take the time. Because people need to be seen, not just treated. And I wanted you to feel that, even if just a little." She nodded, thinking back to the first night she had walked into the hospital. Fear had been her constant companion. She had expected coldness, judgment, and distance. Instead, she found patience, understanding, and a gentle presence that made her feel human again. Over the past weeks, she had faced treatments she had been terrified of, tests she had dreaded and knew she had feared. But with the doctor's guidance, everything had been explained carefully. Every step had been manageable. Every fear had been acknowledged. And most importantly, she hadn't faced it alone. The nurse came in with her medications and a small plate of food. She smiled at her warmly. "You're looking stronger today," she said. It was a simple comment, but it carried warmth. She had grown used to these small gestures. They didn't feel like routine hospital actions anymore. They felt like genuine care. Later, the doctor returned to discuss the next stage of her recovery. He didn't rush her. He explained each step in simple words, making sure she understood and felt confident. When she expressed fear about setbacks or complications, he listened carefully, never dismissing her concerns. He reassured her that mistakes were part of recovery and that progress was about persistence, not perfection. She realized that what she had feared the most, the harshness of doctors, the coldness of hospitals, had never existed here. Instead, she had experienced something she hadn't dared to imagine for years: consistent kindness, patience, and attention. By afternoon, she felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. The emotional weight of the past weeks pressed on her. But it was lighter now, because she had learned she could rely on others, at least in small ways. She had learned that she could accept help without feeling ashamed. That was a lesson she hadn't expected to learn in a hospital as evening approached. The doctor returned for his final visit of the day. He didn't carry papers or charts this time. He simply sat beside her bed and looked at her with steady eyes. "You've done remarkably well," he said. "Not just with your treatment, but with yourself. You allowed yourself to trust, to accept care, to face fear. That's courage." She swallowed hard. Courage. She had always seen herself as someone who just survived, someone who kept going despite everything. But he had named it. He had seen her strength even when she had doubted it herself. "I didn't know it could feel like this," she said softly. "Being cared for without strings, without judgment. I thought it wasn't real." He nodded. "It is real. There are people who care. There are people who want to help without expecting anything in return. You just have to allow it sometimes." She looked at him, the reality settling slowly in her chest. She had been wrong about doctors, wrong about hospitals, wrong about people's hearts. She had assumed heartlessness. She had expected judgment. Instead, she had found patience, understanding, a willingness to see her as more than her illness. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. The fear that had seemed so permanent now felt like a shadow she could move past. The walls she had built around herself to protect against disappointment and coldness were beginning to crack. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she didn't have to face everything alone. The nurse came in one last time to check her vitals and smiled warmly. "You're ready to go home tomorrow," she said. The words felt strange and wonderful. She had feared being trapped in the hospital, lost in machines and schedules. But now leaving felt like a new beginning. The doctor returned to say goodbye for the night. He didn't say much. He simply reminded her to rest, to follow the plan carefully, and to remember that she didn't have to face challenges alone. She realized she would miss his calm presence more than she had expected. As she lay in bed, she reflected on everything that had happened. The fear, the pain, the dread of judgment, it had all been real. But so had the care, the patience, and the understanding. She had been completely wrong to assume the doctor would be heartless. He had shown her a kind of humanity she hadn't experienced in a long time. She thought about the future. Treatment would continue. Challenges would arise. There would be hard days and moments of doubt. But she felt ready now, because she had learned something vital. Trust was not weakness, and accepting help was not failure. There were people who cared, and she could rely on them without shame. The night was quiet, but her mind was alive with thoughts. She remembered the first night she had arrived, terrified and alone, expecting indifference. And now, here she was, nearly healed, feeling stronger, supported, and seen. The contrast was so vast it almost felt unreal. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that not everyone in the world was cold or uncaring. That hope could exist even in difficult circumstances. That someone could dedicate themselves to helping others without expecting anything in return. She picked up a small notebook the doctor had given her weeks ago. She read it again, slowly, letting each word sink in. The encouragement, the guidance, the gentle reminders, they were more than instructions. They were proof that someone had cared deeply, patiently, genuinely. Tears filled her eyes once more, but these were tears of gratitude, of relief, of recognition. She had been wrong about him, wrong about what she thought she knew, and in that wrongness, she found something powerful, a renewed faith in people's hearts, in kindness, and in the possibility of being cared for without conditions. She closed the notebook and held it to her chest. She felt lighter than she had in years. The fear that had haunted her nights was replaced with cautious hope. The pain that had seemed endless felt manageable now, surrounded by support and understanding. As sleep came gently, she whispered to herself, "I was completely wrong about him. And that mistake has changed everything." For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. Truly safe. And she knew that no matter what challenges came next, She had discovered something far more important than treatment alone. She had discovered that hearts could be kind, that trust could be rebuilt, so that love and care could exist in places she had once thought were cold and distant. She closed her eyes, letting herself rest fully, feeling gratitude and hope mingle in her chest. For the first time in years, she believed that life could be gentler than she had ever imagined. And that belief, fragile and precious, was enough. The first days after leaving the hospital felt strange. She was back in her small apartment, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells she had long taken for granted. Yet everything felt different now. The world that had once felt heavy and lonely now seemed lighter, almost gentle in comparison. She had been carrying so much fear and doubt for years, but in the quiet of her apartment, she realized she could breathe again without bracing for disaster. The treatment plan the doctor had given her was clear, but it wasn't easy. There were medications to take, exercises to perform, and appointments to keep. At first, she felt overwhelmed. The responsibility of managing her recovery alone made her chest tighten. She had spent so long relying on herself and preparing for disappointment that asking for help or even following guidance felt foreign. She opened the small notebook the doctor had given her, the pages now worn and filled with notes she had added herself. The advice was simple, but practical. The encouragement was steady, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this process. She read each page slowly, letting the words sink in. They weren't just instructions. They were a lifeline. Her first follow-up appointment with the doctor arrived sooner than she expected. She felt a flutter of nerves as she walked into the hospital. The familiar scent of disinfectant and the soft hum of machines no longer seemed intimidating. Instead, they felt like markers of the journey she had already begun. She was no longer the same person who had collapsed in fear weeks ago. She had faced uncertainty, fear, and pain. And she had survived. The doctor greeted her with the same calm smile that had been a constant in the hospital. "Good to see you again," he said softly. "How have things been at home?" She hesitated, then spoke honestly. "Challenging. I'm trying to follow everything, but it's a lot. I'm afraid of making mistakes," he nodded, understanding. "It's normal to feel that way. Recovery is not just about your body, it's about your mind, your routines, your confidence. Mistakes are part of learning. What matters is that you keep going." She found herself trusting him more than she had expected. She had learned over the years to expect judgment, but he had never judged her. He had always guided her patiently, explained things carefully, and allowed her to grow at her own pace. The day of her appointment was long. Tests, measurements, and evaluations filled the morning. Each result brought a mixture of relief and nervousness. The progress was slow, but steady. She realized that recovery wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence, about showing up for herself day after day. As the afternoon approached, the doctor sat with her to review the results. He spoke quietly, but firmly, highlighting the improvements in the areas that still needed care. "You've made significant progress," he said. "It's not dramatic overnight, but it's meaningful. Your body is responding, and your commitment is making a difference." She smiled, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. It wasn't just the physical progress that mattered. It was the affirmation that she could care for herself and that her efforts were recognized. The validation was unfamiliar, yet it strengthened her resolve. Over the next few weeks, she settled into a new rhythm. Daily routines that had once felt impossible now became manageable. She prepared her meals carefully, followed her medication schedule, and took the time to rest when her body demanded it. The notebook became a companion, a steady guide reminding her to stay mindful, patient, and kind to herself. She also noticed changes she hadn't anticipated. Her mind felt sharper, her mood steadier, and her confidence gradually returning. Small victories, like climbing the stairs without fatigue or completing her exercises without struggle, felt monumental. She realized that recovery was about reclaiming her life, piece by piece. One evening, as she prepared a simple dinner, her phone rang. It was the doctor calling, not for a scheduled appointment, but just to check on her. "How are you doing today?" he asked softly. She paused, surprised by the personal call, then spoke honestly. "Better. I'm keeping up with everything. Some days are harder than others, but I'm doing it." "That's good to hear," he said. "Remember, it's okay to have hard days. What matters is that you keep moving forward. You've come a long way." The conversation stayed with her long after the call ended. She had never had someone genuinely check on her well-being, someone who cared without obligation or expectation. The realization brought a quiet warmth to her chest, a feeling of being seen and valued that she had long forgotten. Weeks turned into months. Her body continued to heal, slowly but surely. She no longer felt the constant ache that had haunted her nights. Her energy returned in small increments, and with it, a sense of freedom she hadn't known for years. But more importantly, her perspective on life shifted. She began to understand that care, trust, and kindness could exist even in places she had assumed were cold. She also began to share her experience quietly with friends and family, not as a story of illness, but as a story of resilience, hope, and the power of genuine care. She realized that her journey could help others see that recovery wasn't just about medicine. It was about human connection, patience, and understanding. One afternoon, she walked through the park near her apartment. The sun was warm on her face, and the city felt alive around her. She thought about the first night she had collapsed, terrified and alone, expecting judgment and indifference. And now, here she was, stronger, calmer, and supported. The contrast was immense, almost unbelievable. She stopped by a bench and sat down, taking a deep breath. She realized how much she had grown. She had learned to accept help, to trust, to hope, and to care for herself in ways she hadn't imagined possible. And she knew she couldn't have done it alone. The doctor, the nurses, the quiet gestures of attention and patience, they had all been part of her recovery in that moment. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the treatment or the progress, but for the humanity she had experienced. She had assumed heartlessness, and yet she had found hearts full of care, patience, and understanding. She had been completely wrong, and that realization had changed everything. Her phone buzzed with a message from the doctor. Simple note checking in on her and reminding her to take care of herself. She smiled, feeling the warmth of connection once more. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of weeks of support, guidance, and patience. As she walked home, she reflected on how much her life had shifted. She had faced fear and pain, uncertainty and doubt, but she had emerged stronger and more resilient. She had discovered the value of trust, the power of care, and the importance of allowing herself to be vulnerable. That night, she sat by her window, looking out at the city lights. She held the notebook the doctor had given her close and whispered softly, "I was completely wrong about you. And because of that mistake, I found something I didn't even know I needed." The journey wasn't over. Recovery, life, and challenges would continue. But she felt ready now, armed not just with medicine, but with trust, hope, and the knowledge that kindness could exist even in unexpected places. She had been wrong about heartlessness, and in being wrong, she had discovered something far more valuable: the strength of human connection, the warmth of care, and the courage to believe in both. As sleep came gently, she felt a profound peace she hadn't known in years. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet of the night wrap around her. The fear and doubt that had once seemed endless now felt distant. In their place was gratitude, hope, and a steady belief that the world could be kinder than she had imagined. And in that peace she realized that sometimes being completely wrong about someone's heart could change your life in ways you never expected.